A few years ago I started making my dream game about a hunter and their crusty pet companion. It was mostly inspired by my experience playing a hunter in World of Warcraft, but I wanted to take that class fantasy and make it work with a real-time action combat system and add a lot of my own ideas to it. One of the key features was that you could switch between controlling the hunter or the beast at any given time, while your partner would be controlled by AI. The hunter could set traps, charge an aimed shot, or activate a rapid fire series when hitting 2 headshots in a row, while each beast had their own unique abilities. Considering that the main theme of the game is cooperation between hunter and beast, it was a no-brainer to implement a split-screen multiplayer mode that could be activated on the fly. For the first couple of months it seemed like everything was going well and I was on the right track, but over time the project turned into an absolute nightmare. But before going into more details about that, let's rewind a bit and talk a bit about how and why I even started this project. Like many of you, I played a lot of WoW back when it first came out and was mostly active throughout Vanilla, Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King. I didn't really know much about the game before I started, but the one thing I was certain about was that I'm gonna be a Tauren hunter. Something about being able to tame beasts and having them support you in combat sounded very appealing to me, and so did dealing damage from afar with a ranged weapon. Back then, the game wasn't as streamlined as it is now, and there were many things you needed to micromanage, such as feeding your pet to keep it happy, having to deal with a dead zone, and keeping track of your ammunition. Even though these things could be annoying, they all added to the hunter class fantasy. I also loved that as a hunter you weren't simply a damage dealer, but would also act as a scout in raids and dungeons and dictate the pace by keeping an eye out for patrols and initiating pulls. But it seemed like in order to streamline the game and make it more accessible, a lot of the things that set the hunter apart from other classes were removed over the following expansions. And I started maining a warrior, and eventually stopped playing WoW altogether. Before we continue, a quick word from this video's sponsor. Virtuous Creative Hub reached out to me to help with promoting their FPS Beginner Course. This tutorial series will teach you all you need to know to start making your dream first-person shooter. It covers everything from attachments, aim down sights, sprinting and much more, all using blueprints. What sets this course apart from others is that it's very well paced and streamlined to provide a lot of high quality information in a short amount of time. So if you're ready to level up your FPS game dev skills, click the affiliate link in the description to sign up for Virtuous Creative Hub's FPS Beginner Course and support Cobra Code. Every once in a while I'd come across other games with pet taming mechanics that would scratch the same itch that WoW did, but the excitement usually wouldn't last too long. So since I was studying game programming at a game dev college and have become quite familiar with Unreal Engine 4, I thought to myself that it might be worth trying to create my own hunter game. I also still needed to decide on a graduation project, so doing this would let me kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I first started work on the hunter character. Since the tab targeting system in WoW felt quite outdated and limiting, the shooting was an area where I wanted to make big changes. I bought an asset pack with archer animations from Frank Climax and just implemented simple shooting through a line trace at first, which I later on changed to be projectile based. To make combat feel more visceral, I added ragdoll physics to the enemies pretty early on, and also made the arrows dig into the victim's skeletal mesh. To heighten the skill ceiling and reward good aim, I of course made headshots deal more damage than body shots, which was actually pretty easy to do by just checking the name of which bone was hit. Additionally, if you land 2 headshots in a row, it'll proc a rapid fire series which deals a lot of damage. To convey to the character that the rapid fire is ready, I added a simple particle effect. This was actually my first attempt ever at making a particle system, and it's inspired by the effect you get when using Bestial Wrath. One of my favorite skills as a marksman hunter was of course the aimed shot. I really liked the idea of being able to get a huge opener from far away, or a big reward for being able to trap or snare your enemy. So for the right mouse button I added this charge shot ability, which was inspired by aimed shot and hits for
big damage.
But to make it better fit the action combat system and feel more impactful, I added a lot of pushback to it, and also some screen shake for good measure. I also added a short time frame in which you can fire off a second charged shot when clicking the right mouse button again. This means that if you line it up correctly you can hit 2 charged headshots and go right into a rapid fire series.
Now that's a lot of damage!
Another big part of the hunter class is the ability to lay traps, and traps in WoW have seen many changes over the years. Back in Vanilla you could only lay traps while you're out of combat or right after using Feign Death. But over time the way you can use them has become more lenient and they've become more and more useful. In my game, I actually didn't spend that much time on the trapping system yet, and it's still very bare bones. I couldn't find a model for a bear trap anywhere, so I used my very limited Blender knowledge to make one by myself. Instead of using a skeletal mesh with animations, I simply made 3 static meshes and animated their rotation right inside of Unreal Engine to make the trap open and close. There still weren't any restrictions on when you can lay a trap and how many can be active at a time. And I guess the system was close to traps from Burning Crusade onward, where you can lay them while in combat, but they need a few seconds to activate. I only really finished the frost trap, which spawns a very ugly decal upon being triggered to show the frozen over area in which enemies get slowed down. It was very useful when you set it up before pulling to make sure you can slow down and finish off an enemy before they reach you, or when you're being chased and need to run away. If I would have continued working on this game, I would have added many more trap variations and maybe even the trap launcher ability. Another ability I gave the hunter was an arrow rain. I guess it's similar to the current version of volley in retail WoW, since you don't have to channel it anymore. You just put it out there and arrows keep raining down in the assigned area while you can go back to shooting or running away. I felt like the hunter still wasn't mobile enough and it was hard to get away when enemies were close to you. In WoW they added disengage for that purpose, which is an ability that causes the hunter to leap backward, but I wanted to do something a bit different that requires some more situational awareness. When pressing the space key, a sphere trace will check if your pet is right in front of you. If it is, the hunter will execute a vault jump that covers a lot of ground and will disengage you from combat. This makes it so that if you want to disengage, you'll have to be aware of where your pet is and might need to call it back. That pretty much sums up what I finished for the archer. If development continued, my idea was to not just have a general hunter archetype, but actually have subtypes that go deeper into different class fantasies. The character you've seen so far would have gotten even more archer type abilities, and I would have loved to change the appearance to look closer to the hooded elf archetype you often see in WoW, but also in many other games. Another subtype I would have loved to put into the game is the typical dwarven hunter specializing in rifles. Since I was always a loyal horde player back in the day, I was never able to live out that fantasy, until recently. For the sake of making this video, I actually got a WoW subscription for the first time in years and created a dark iron dwarf hunter. Something about the shooting animations and the way the armor looks on them because of their body proportions just really appeals to me. I was also enjoying a lot of the new abilities that have been added over the last few expansions. For my game I still wasn't too sure how to make the dwarf different from the archer, but since it would specialize in guns, it would probably have a shotgun blast that pushes enemies away instead of disengage, and also use grenades, explosive traps and other abilities that take inspiration from engineering. The third and last archetype I was considering was an axe thrower. Now this isn't the typical hunter archetype you'll often see, but I thought it would work very well with the game's action combat system and be very different from the other two subtypes. Back when I played Heroes of the Storm, my main was Zul'jin. He excels at mid-range combat and has many cool abilities I would have taken inspiration from for my game. He differed from the other characters in the way that he wouldn't have to kite as much and can fight effectively from mid-range, and maybe even have some melee and regeneration abilities. Now that I'm finished talking about the hunter, let's get into talking about the beasts and what they bring to the table. Like I mentioned before, you can switch between controlling the hunter or the beast at any point in time, while your partner will be controlled by AI. In WoW you could use Eyes of the Beast to take direct control of your pet for a short amount of time, however there wasn't really much you could do and the hunter would just stand there and channel the spell the entire time. In my game on the other hand, it is actually viable to play as the beast since the hunter will support you from afar and every beast has multiple abilities you can master. One of the most exciting things as a hunter in WoW is seeing a new beast in the world, walking up to it and using beast lore to see if it's tameable or not. Knowing that you can possibly find some unique beasts hidden around the map was a great motivation for exploration, and back in the day you'd sometimes also have to recruit friends to help you out if you want to tame a beast that's located inside of a dungeon. So in my game I also wanted to recreate that feeling of mystery and wonder and just let you tame any beast you come across. But there still was no animation for it and taming didn't have any prerequisites. I'd simply draw a sphere trace in front of the hunter and tame whatever animal was in front of it at first. But later on I actually had to make a playable demo since I was also using this game for my graduation project, and the taming system would have been too complicated for teachers or other students to understand without a proper tutorial. So I actually got rid of it and simply made you pick one of the 3 animal partners at the start menu. By the way, you can actually download this demo on itch.io and try it for yourself through the link in the description. There are a few systems that are shared between all animals. Every beast has a primary attack that deals moderate damage and can be activated by clicking or holding the left mouse button. They also all have a taunt with a 6-second cooldown. It simply draws a sphere trace in front of the animal and draws the attention of the first detected enemy. The first beast I put into the game was the wolf, since it was one of the free monthly assets at some point and I had it in my library. I designed it to be an all-rounder that has a lot of mobility and is great at supporting the hunter. The first special attack is a lunge attack that deals more damage than the bite and also allows you to cover a lot of ground. The shift key ability will cause a small explosion that deals damage to nearby enemies and gives the wolf a temporary speed boost. The last ability is on a 30-second cooldown but really powerful. The wolf howls to buff the attack speed of itself and the hunter, which is actually pretty close to the ability ferocity pets now have in Dragonflight. The next beast I implemented was the bear. And this was really exciting for me because back in vanilla, the first companion I really bonded with and kept for a long time was my bear. Of course, the bear was designed to be a tank with a lot of health that is great at protecting the hunter. Since you'll often tank multiple enemies at once, the alternative attack is a paw swipe that hits in a wide arc and also knocks back opponents a little bit. For mobility, I gave it a charge ability that will also stun all targets in the impact area. The way it works is by drawing multiple line traces in front of the bear to see if there's an available path and then follow it. The last ability is an AoE taunt that will draw the attention of all enemies in a wide area. This ability is great if you gather up a lot of enemies and use it together with the hunter's arrow rain ability. The last beast I created was the panther, which has a pretty high skill ceiling and is very much inspired by the rogue class in WoW. The alternative attack can only be used when behind the enemy, but deals a lot of damage, so it's basically backstab. The way it works is again by drawing a sphere trace to check if an enemy is nearby, and then also check which direction they are looking to determine if the attack can be executed or not. It also has an ability that allows it to go into stealth and become undetectable to all enemies. Actually to the point where you can bump into them without them noticing you, so I would have definitely adjusted this a bit so they can still detect you if you're being clumsy. While in this state, the primary attack and alternative attack will both change to something different. The left click will change into a pounce that will simply stun the enemy for a few seconds. The right click on the other hand is similar to ambush and can again only be executed when behind an enemy for big damage. The last ability will let you dive into the shadows and teleport forward. This ability is great for running away or setting up ambushes quickly. Of course there are many more beast archetypes I would have added if I ever completed the game. But as you can see, there's a lot of work going into making every beast unique and fun to play, so there would be a limit on how many I could create. Everything regarding the hunter and beast mechanics was coming along great and I was actually pretty happy with how things turned out. But some big issues started to become more and more apparent. The first big issue is something you've probably already noticed, which is that the graphics of the game don't look very appealing. I guess some people like this chunky, super low poly style, but I myself am not a fan of it. So you might ask why I choose this art direction to begin with. Well, like I mentioned before, I got the low poly wolf asset for free at some point and just started building the game prototype with it. As I started looking for assets for other beasts, I noticed that there really weren't that many choices, but it just so happened that the same creator also had assets for the bear and panther. What's great about these is that they come with a lot of different animations and are pretty versatile. So in order to match the art style of the beasts, I also had to use something really low poly for the hunter and ended up picking the Polygon Fantasy Rivals pack. I also needed meshes for the bear trap, arrow, bow and things like that, which you can't really find that easily. And the other assets being really low poly actually helped a lot here, since even with my very limited Blender knowledge, I could create assets that fit the art style and don't stick out too much. So the art direction was dictated by the assets I could find and create, rather than me consciously choosing it. I would have much rather taken the game into a highly stylized direction similar to Heroes of the Storm if I had the means to do so back then. Now that a lot more people are putting their stuff out on the Unreal Engine marketplace and I know the correct vocabulary to look for these assets, I can actually find a lot of awesome environments and characters. Just recently I stumbled upon this great pack of stylized beast which is pretty close to perfect for me. It comes with a lot of animations and customization options, so even with only 7 beast types I could have created poisonous variants, shadow variants and many more to spice things up. But the art style wasn't the biggest issue, it was the complete lack of a core gameplay loop. I was only concentrating on how I wanted the hunter and beast to control and how they'd feel in combat. But just having a barren prototyping area and a few enemies placed here and there isn't fun, even if you had the most amazing combat system ever. What makes hunters fun in WoW is the fact that there's already a compelling gameplay loop in place and a huge world you can explore together with your companion. The hunter abilities and class fantasy are just the icing on the cake, so I pretty much had a game which was all icing and no cake, which is a huge issue. So at that point I had to start thinking about what I want to enable the player to do and how I'm gonna go about making levels. Since exploration and freedom should be a big part of the game, making small and linear levels was out of question. I'd have to create an open world or at least a few large maps, which sucked because I had no experience whatsoever making maps and wouldn't really call myself an artistic person either. But I decided to give it a try and started watching a few tutorials about landscape creation and started working on a demo map. The process was extremely painful and long-winded for me because I constantly felt like I'm just randomly placing stuff throughout the map without any rhyme or reason. But after a week or two I had a somewhat presentable map and started placing enemy spawners, trees and ores in it. To be able to use this as my graduation project, I also had to add some directions for the teachers and other students, so I put together a really simple quest system. You're first told to find a vantage point to get an overview of the map. After that, you need to meet the summoner at the oasis who's going to ask you to gather some materials. Once you've gathered the materials, you can meet the summoner again at the altar to have him call upon the final boss of the demo, who is a giant rock golem. The boss fight is pretty simple, but just having your pet tank it won't be enough, since it deals a lot of damage up close. You'll actually have to kite it around the map and deal damage to it little by little while avoiding its leap attack. But after I was done making the demo, I wasn't really happy with the result. Even though I spent so much time on making the map, it was still mostly empty and uninteresting. The quests also took a lot of time to make, but basically only led to about 5 minutes of guided gameplay in the end. As my graduation project, it was actually a success. However, as the base for an actual indie game that I'd have to dedicate a few years of my life to in order to complete it, it was an absolute failure. In an attempt to save it, I tried to come up with other ideas to fix the gameplay loop, and for some reason I landed on something crazy like, just make it like Call of Duty Zombies transit map, where you get on the bus and ride around different parts of the map as you build contraptions and open up new areas. Instead of buying weapons from the wall or mystery box, you'd instead get buffs that increase your haste, damage, crit chance and maybe even unlock new abilities. Instead of zombies, it would be ferocious beasts chasing you around the map, and instead of the bus, I planned on creating a train with an open platform you can stand on and shoot at pursuing enemies. I actually started working on this crazy idea a little bit by setting up world partitioning and a mock-up for the starting village. I also made a very simple wave spawner that will just constantly spawn beasts that charge at you, but that's the last thing I did for this game. At the time, my friend and I got a great idea for a different game that we should have been able to complete within about 3 months. In the end, it actually took 2 full years to get out of early access and release the 1.0 version on Steam. But during my time away from the Hunter project, I realized more and more that there's no point in going back to it since it was plagued with so many issues. I decided to completely abandon it and started to dedicate all of my time and energy to this YouTube channel, which has been a lot more fruitful and satisfying. I do still believe that the Hunter game had some great ideas and elements that worked out quite well, so now that I'm more experienced with making games, I definitely do want to revisit some of those ideas. The first step will probably be to just implement an archer class into my beat'em up that takes inspiration from my Hunter game. If you enjoyed this video, I guarantee you that you'll also like my devlog about creating a spiritual successor to Donkey Kong Jungle Beat in Unreal Engine, so make sure to check it out here. As always, thanks to my awesome patrons.